The moment San Antonio could no longer ignore. De'Aaron Fox did not just have a bad night. He walked straight into the kind of game that can change how an entire franchise looks at you. And inside San Antonio, that is exactly what people are starting to believe. For weeks, the Spurs tried to sell patience. They tried to tell themselves this was adjustment, chemistry, timing, rhythm, all the usual words teams use when a talented player is not fitting the way he was supposed to fit. But after what happened in Game 4, the excuses are running out fast. Because this was not about one missed shot, this was not about one unlucky bounce, this was about trust. And right now, De'Aaron Fox is dangerously close to losing all of it. The scary part is that nobody is questioning his talent. That has never been the issue. Fox is still one of the fastest guards in the league. He can get downhill, he can put pressure on the rim, he can create moments that make fans jump out of their seats. But the problem is, what happens right after those moments? One flash of brilliance, then two careless possessions. One explosive drive, then a turnover that kills the entire rhythm. One good play, then a decision so confusing that even his own bench looks frozen. That is the pattern that has started to haunt him. And for a Spurs team trying to build something serious around Victor Wembanyama, that pattern is not just annoying, it is dangerous. San Antonio is not building for highlight reels. They are building for playoff pressure, late game discipline, and championship habits. Every player around Wemby has to make the game cleaner, smarter, calmer. Fox was supposed to be that veteran guard who could speed up the offense without destroying its structure. Instead, he has become the question nobody inside the building can avoid. Can the Spurs really trust him when the game gets tight? Because Game 4 gave them an answer they did not want to hear. So before we break down the old Sacramento clip, the late game mistakes, the locker room tension, and why this situation may explode faster than fans realize, tell me where you are watching from. If you think Fox still deserves another chance, press 1" the comments. If you think San Antonio should move on before this damages Wemby's future, press 2. And if you are following this story closely, subscribe now, because this may be the beginning of a much bigger Spurs decision. The problem is bigger than one bad game. The easiest thing to do after a loss is point to the box score and move on. A player shoots poorly. A few turnovers show up, the team loses, everybody promises to be better next time. But what if the numbers are hiding the real problem? That is where the De'Aaron Fox conversation becomes uncomfortable. Because when Spurs coaches reportedly started reviewing Game 4, they were not just looking at the mistakes themselves, they were looking at when those mistakes happened. And that distinction changes everything. Basketball games are full of errors. Even the greatest players ever have bad possessions. Michael Jordan had turnovers. LeBron James has missed game winners. Stephen Curry has thrown passes into the stands. Mistakes are part of the sport. The difference between good players and great players is what happens when the pressure rises. When the game is tied, when momentum shifts, when every possession suddenly feels twice as important, those are the moments that define reputations. And unfortunately for Fox, those are the moments that keep raising the same question. Throughout Game 4, there were opportunities for San Antonio to seize control. Small openings, tiny cracks in the opponent's defense, moments where one smart possession could have changed the direction of the entire night. Instead, those opportunities kept disappearing. A rushed decision, a careless pass, a drive into traffic with nowhere to go. Each mistake by itself was survivable. Together, they created something much worse. They created frustration, and frustration spreads quickly inside a locker room. Imagine being a young player, trying to establish winning habits. Imagine sprinting back on defense, fighting through screens, executing the game plan exactly as the coaches designed it, then watching a veteran leader immediately hand the ball back to the other team. Once is forgivable, twice is annoying. 5 or 6 times starts becoming a serious issue. That is why the conversation around Fox has changed. People are no longer debating his talent level. They are debating reliability. Those are two very different discussions. Talent gets you drafted, reliability gets you trusted. Talent earns contracts, reliability earns championships. The Spurs thought they were acquiring both. Now they are wondering if they only got one. What makes this situation even more concerning is that these mistakes rarely look random. They look familiar. Fans have seen them before. Analysts have seen them before. Opposing teams certainly have seen them before. And when the same type of mistake keeps appearing year after year, eventually people stop calling it bad luck. They start calling it a pattern. That is exactly why an old video from Fox's Sacramento days suddenly exploded across social media after Game 4. What fans discovered was not just a bad play from years ago. It was something much more damaging. It was evidence. Evidence that the problems Spurs fans are seeing today may have been hiding in plain sight all along. And once that clip resurfaced, the entire conversation around De'Aaron Fox changed overnight. The clip that changed everything. At first, it looked like social media was simply overreacting. A bad game happens. Fans get emotional. Clips get shared. Hot takes start flying everywhere. That is how the NBA works in 2026. But then somebody found an old video, and suddenly this stopped being about Game 4. It became about an entire career. The clip came from Fox's Sacramento Kings days, and within hours it was everywhere. NBA forums, basketball podcasts, comment sections, fan pages. Everyone was watching the same sequence over and over again. Not because it was spectacular, because it was shocking. The situation was simple. Sacramento was protecting a late lead. The opposing team needed a three-pointer to stay alive. Every defender on the floor knew exactly what the assignment was. Do not lose the shooter. That is it. One responsibility, one job. One thing that absolutely could not happen, and somehow it happened. Fox lost track of the most dangerous shooter on the floor. The player got open, the shot went up. Then somehow the situation became even worse when Fox committed a foul during the attempt. 3 free throws, a chance to tie the game, a completely avoidable disaster. The opponent converted, the game went to overtime. The Kings eventually lost. At the time, fans called it a terrible mistake and moved on. After all, every player has ugly moments somewhere in their career. But years later, after Game 4 in San Antonio, that same play suddenly looked very different. Fans were no longer seeing a random mistake. They were seeing a pattern, and patterns are much harder to defend. When people watch the Sacramento clips side by side with Fox's recent Spurs struggles, similarities jumped off the screen. Not necessarily the exact basketball actions, but the decision-making process behind them. The pressure rises. The moment gets bigger. The margin for error disappears. And somehow the wrong decision followed. That realization hit Spurs fans hard because many of them believed San Antonio was getting a more mature version of Fox, a veteran, a player who had learned from years of experience, someone ready to help guide Victor Wembanyama through the next stage of the rebuild. Instead, they started wondering whether the same issues had simply followed him from one franchise to another. That question is brutal because it attacks something deeper than skill. It attacks trust. A coach can design plays. A coach can improve spacing. A coach can adjust rotations. What a coach cannot do is make players trustworthy under pressure. That has to come from the player himself. And right now, every turnover, every rush decision, every resurface clip is making that trust harder to maintain. Even worse for Fox, former Kings fans started joining the conversation. Many of them responded with a surprising reaction. They were not shocked. They were not defending him. They were saying they had seen this movie before. For Spurs supporters hoping Game 4 was just an isolated incident, that reaction was probably the most alarming part of all. Because if Sacramento spent years waiting for these habits to disappear, and San Antonio is now seeing the same things, then the Spurs front office may be facing a much bigger decision than anyone originally expected. And that decision becomes even more complicated when you remember who this franchise is really building around. Victor Wembanyama, the player whose future could determine everything. The Wembanyama factor changes everything. If this were a normal rebuilding team, San Antonio might wait long. But this is not normal anymore. They have Victor Wembanyama. That changes the clock. Every roster decision now comes down to one question. Does this help Wemby become a champion? That is why De'Aaron Fox's mistakes feel bigger than one bad game. When he arrived, the idea sounded exciting. A fast guard next to a generational big man, Fox could attack the paint, bend defenses, and create easier looks for Wembanyama. But the reality has been complicated. The Spurs do not just need talent around Wemby. They need discipline. They need calm decisions. They need players who protect possessions when the game gets tight. San Antonio's history is built on smart basketball. Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili did not win because they chased highlights. They won because they made the right play over and over again. That is why Fox's turnovers and late-game mistakes are so alarming. A young star like Wembanyama watches everything. He sees who stays composed, he sees who loses focus, he sees which veterans can be trusted when pressure rises. And right now, Fox is forcing the Spurs to ask a painful question. Is he helping Wemby grow, or is he creating bad habits around him? Nobody doubts Fox's speed. Nobody doubts his scoring ability. The concern is reliability. Because championship teams are not built on talent alone. They are built on trust. And if San Antonio no longer trusts Fox in the biggest moments, then his future with the Spurs may already be in danger. The locker room is where this gets dangerous. The biggest damage from De'Aaron Fox's mistakes may not show up in the box score. It shows up in the locker room. That is where trust is either built or broken. When a veteran guard makes the right play, younger teammates follow him. When he controls the tempo, protects the ball, and stays locked in defensively, the whole team feels safer. But when that same player keeps making careless decisions, the energy changes. Players stop expecting stability. Coaches start hesitating. Fans begin reading every timeout, every substitution, every reaction from the bench. And that is exactly why this situation feels so tense in San Antonio. Fox is not some rookie trying to survive his first playoff level pressure. He is supposed to be one of the experienced voices. He is supposed to be the guard who organizes the offense when things get messy. Instead, too many possessions have ended with confusion. A forced drive, a late pass, a turnover at the worst possible time, a defensive lapse that makes everyone look around like they cannot believe what just happened. For a rebuilding team, that can become poisonous fast because young players are not just learning plays. They are learning standard. They are learning what gets accepted. They are learning what the franchise allows. If the Spurs allow repeated mistakes from a high-paid veteran, what message does that send to everyone else? That is the question the coaching staff cannot ignore. San Antonio has always been a culture-first organization. The Spurs do not want chaos. They do not want drama becoming louder than development. They do not want Wembanyama's early years surrounded by uncertainty. That is why Fox's situation has become more than basketball. It is now about leadership. It is about accountability. It is about whether one talented player fits the identity of an entire franchise. And once a team starts asking that question, the answer usually arrives faster than people expect. The contract problem nobody wants to talk about. There is another layer to this story that makes the situation even more complicated. Money. A lot of money. If De'Aaron Fox were a role player making a small salary, the Spurs could simply reduce his minutes and move forward. The conversation would be uncomfortable, but manageable. That is not the case. Fox occupies a major financial slot on the roster, and in today's NBA, every dollar matters when you're building around a superstar like Victor Wembanyama. That is why executives do not just evaluate players based on talent, they evaluate value, and those are not always the same thing. A player can score 20 points per game and still hurt a team's future if his impact does not match his salary. A player can fill up the stat sheet and still create problems if he struggles in the moments that matter most. That is where Fox's critics believe the Spurs are finding themselves. When San Antonio looks at its future, they see a roster that will eventually need championship-level pieces around Wembanyama. Reliable shooters, smart defenders, veteran leaders, players who make winning plays under pressure. The question becomes simple. Is Fox worth the investment compared to the alternatives? That is not an easy question to answer, because talent like his does not grow on trees. His speed is elite. His ability to attack the rim is still dangerous. On the right night, he can completely take over a game. But the NBA is full of talented players. What separates valuable players from expensive players is consistency. And consistency is exactly where doubts have started to grow. Imagine being a Spurs executive reviewing film late at night. You see the turnovers. You see the late game mistakes. You see the resurfaced Sacramento clip. Then you look at the contract. Suddenly, every decision becomes harder. Because if you keep Fox, you are betting that these issues can be fixed. If you trade him, you risk giving up on a talented player too soon. If you wait too long, his value could continue to drop. None of those options are comfortable. That is why situations like this often reach a breaking point faster than fans realize. Not because teams hate the player, not because the player lacks talent, but because the business side of basketball eventually forces a decision. And right now, San Antonio may be approaching that crossroads. The scary part for Fox is that once front offices start viewing a player as a financial question instead of a basketball solution, the conversation changes completely. And when that happens, trades that once seemed impossible suddenly become very real. 3 paths, 1 massive decision. At this point, the Spurs are facing a decision that could shape the next phase of their rebuild. And there are really only 3 realistic paths forward. The first option is simple. Keep De'Aaron Fox. Trust that the recent criticism is an overreaction. Trust that the mistakes are temporary. Trust that a player with his talent can still become the backcourt partner Wembanyama needs. This is the safest option in the short term. No major roster shakeup, no difficult trade negotiations, no headlines questioning the front office. But it is also the riskiest option if the same problems continue, because every game that passes without improvement makes the concerns louder. And every late game mistake strengthens the argument that the Spurs are wasting valuable development years around Wembanyama. The second option is far more aggressive. Trade Fox. This is the path many frustrated fans are already discussing. Move him while he still has value. Bring back younger assets, draft capital, or players who better fit the culture San Antonio wants to build. The challenge is obvious. Trading a talented player is easy. Winning the trade is hard. Other front offices are watching the same games. They see the same turnovers. They hear the same criticism. Any team interested in Fox will likely try to buy low. That puts pressure on the Spurs to decide whether moving him is worth accepting a smaller return. Still, if San Antonio believes Fox is not part of the long-term vision, waiting could become even more expensive. Then there is the third option, the most dramatic option. Give Fox one final opportunity to prove everyone wrong. No excuse. No waiting for next season. No promises about potential. Just results. This path would place enormous pressure on Fox, but it would also give him something he desperately needs right now. A chance to change the narrative. Because make no mistake, the narrative has shifted. The conversation used to be about what Fox could become. Now it is about whether he can be trusted. That is a much tougher battle to win. The NBA has seen players recover from situations like this before. Careers have been revived. Reputations have been rebuilt. Critics have been silenced. But those turnarounds usually begin with accountability. They begin when a player recognizes the problem and attacks it head on. The question facing San Antonio is whether Fox is ready to do that. And if the answer is no, then the Spurs may soon decide that their future is better served moving in a different direction. Because the closer this team gets to contention, the less patience there will be for uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly what De'Aaron Fox represents right now. The reputation is starting to follow him. The most dangerous thing for De'Aaron Fox right now is not one bad game. It is the reputation being built from that game. In the NBA, reputation moves fast. One clip becomes a debate, one debate becomes a label. And once a player gets labeled as unreliable under pressure, that label can follow him everywhere. That is what Fox is facing now. The resurfaced Sacramento clip did not just remind people of an old mistake, it gave fans a storyline. Same player, same pressure, same type of breakdown. That is the kind of story NBA audiences remember, and front offices remember it too. When teams evaluate players, they are not only asking who can score, they are asking who can survive the hardest possessions in May and June. They are asking who can execute a defensive assignment with the season on the line. They are asking who can stay calm when the building gets loud and the game starts speeding up. Right now, Fox has not answered those questions well enough. That is why this situation feels so dangerous for his career. Because if the Spurs move on from him, the rest of the league will notice. Teams may still be interested. Talent always gets attention. Speed always gets attention. A guard who can attack the rim will always have a market, but the tone of that interest could change. Instead of seeing Fox as a franchise guard, teams may start seeing him as a risky piece. A player who can help in stretches but cannot fully be trusted late. A player who needs the perfect system. A player who may cost more than he solves. That is a brutal place to be. And for Fox, the only way out is performance. Not interviews, not excuses, not vague promises about being better. He needs to show it on the floor. He needs clean fourth quarters. He needs smarter possessions. He needs defensive focus that does not disappear when the game tightens. Because the league is watching now. San Antonio is watching. Spurs fans are watching. Kings fans are watching with that uncomfortable feeling that they have seen this story before. And every next game becomes another test of whether De'Aaron Fox can change the conversation before the conversation changes his career. The rest of the league is watching. What happens next will not stay inside San Antonio. The entire league is watching now. Every front office understands that Fox is still talented. They know his speed can break defenses. They know he can create shots when the offense gets stuck. They know that in the right game, he can still look like an all-star level guard. But they also know the concerns. The turnovers, the defensive lapses, the late game panic, the old Sacramento clip that now feels impossible to separate from the present. That is why his market could become complicated. Some teams may look at Fox and see a buying opportunity. They may believe San Antonio's frustration creates a chance to get a talented guard for a lower price. They may convince themselves that a new coach, a different system, or a stronger locker room can fix the flaws. Other teams will be far more cautious. They will ask whether Fox can be trusted in playoff basketball. They will ask whether his salary matches his impact. They will ask whether his best moments are worth the mistakes that come with them. And that is where San Antonio has to be careful. If they trade him too quickly, they might lose value. If they wait too long, the value could drop even more. That is the trap. Fox is no longer just a player evaluation. He is an asset management problem. And for a franchise building around Wembanyama, wasting assets is not an option. The Spurs need players who fit the timeline, the culture, and the pressure of what they are trying to build. They need pieces who make Wemby's life easier. They need stability, not uncertainty. So whether Fox stays, gets traded, or receives one final chance, the next move has to be precise, because the decision will send a message to Wembanyama, to the locker room, to Spurs fans, and to the rest of the NBA. San Antonio is about to show whether it still values discipline over reputation, trust over talent, and long-term culture over short-term excitement. And for De'Aaron Fox, that may be the most frightening part of all, because once a team starts asking whether it is better without you, the clock is already ticking. The lesson behind the De'Aaron Fox situation, in the end, this story is about much more than De'Aaron Fox. It is about one of the hardest truths in professional sports. Talent alone is never enough. The NBA is filled with incredible athletes. Every roster has players who can run faster, jump higher, and score in ways most people can only dream about. But when championships are won, the conversation almost always comes back to the same qualities: discipline, trust, consistency, decision-making. Those are the traits that separate good players from winning players, and that is why the Spurs find themselves at such an important crossroad. As they build around Victor Wembanyama, every choice matters. Every roster spot matters. Every veteran presence matters. The franchise is trying to create an environment where winning habits become permanent habits. That mission is bigger than any single player, bigger than any contract, bigger than any reputation. The difficult reality for Fox is that the questions surrounding him have continued to grow louder instead of quieter. The mistakes that once looked isolated now appear connected. The concerns that once came from fans are now being discussed throughout the basketball world. None of this means his career is over. Far from it. NBA history is full of players who faced criticism, responded the right way, and completely transformed how people viewed them. Some of the league's most respected veterans were once questioned. Some of its greatest comeback stories began at moments that looked very similar to this one. The difference is what happens next. This is where character becomes more important than talent. This is where accountability matters. This is where a player decides whether criticism becomes fuel or becomes an excuse. If Fox is willing to confront the weaknesses in his game, improve his decision-making, and earn back trust possession by possession, there is still time to rewrite this story. But if nothing changes, the outcome may already be predictable. For San Antonio, the lesson is equally important. Organizations that win consistently are willing to make difficult decisions before everyone else agrees with them. They identify problems early, they protect their culture. They prioritize long-term success over short-term comfort. That philosophy helped build the Spurs dynasty, and it may guide the next era as well. No matter what happens next, one thing is certain. The future of the Spurs belongs to Victor Wembanyama. Every move will be measured against that reality. Every player will be evaluated through that lens. And every decision from this point forward will help determine whether San Antonio returns to championship contention or remains stuck searching for answers. Now, we want to hear from you. Should the Spurs give De'Aaron Fox one final opportunity to prove himself? Press 1 if you think he deserves another chance. Press 2 if you think San Antonio should move on immediately. And don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share it with fellow NBA fans. Your support helps us bring you the latest NBA news, trade rumors, player drama, and breaking stories every single day. This story is still developing, and trust us, the next chapter could be even bigger.